If you're worried about CBDCs, today I'm going to tell you about more than 15 countries that don't have one, and some even gave up on theirs. Now at Nomad Capitals, we believe there will always be somewhere to go, so if this is an issue for you, let's get to the list. And the first three on the list are countries that tried and said, we actually don't want to do this. According to Cointelegraph, one of those countries is Denmark, the Nordic country, one of the earliest countries to explore the possibility of issuing a CBDC, with the Danish central bank expressing interest back in 2016. But after only a year of research, they realized this wasn't for them, ruling it out and saying it would do little to improve the country's financial infrastructure. The regulator argued that Denmark already had a secure and effective payments infrastructure in place, which provided instant payment options. They said it is not clear how retail CBDCs will create significant added value relative to the existing solutions in Denmark. They also said that associated costs and possible risks, as well as potential damage to the private sector, just made it not worth the effort. Another country that gave up on CBDCs is Japan. Now, they're the third wealthiest country after the US and China, and also the third largest pension market in the world. Japan is one of, if not the oldest countries in the world. It's becoming a real problem. But their central bank released an initial report back in 2020 on CBDCs, saying that they were testing a digital currency proof of concept in early 2021 and plan to finish by last year. However, eventually, the bank officials came out and said that they did not want to use the digital yen, citing its risks to financial stability. The bank issued a report claiming it had no plan to issue a CBDC, and their strong preference for cash and high ratio of bank account holding in Japan, saying that the CBDC as a public good must also complement and coexist private payment services, and figured they couldn't do that. The last country is Ecuador, whose official currency is actually the US dollar, and their central bank officially announced its own electronic currency way back in 2014. Key drivers of that program were increasing financial inclusion, that's one of the things that they say, and reducing the need for the central bank to hold and distribute large amounts of fiat currency. And so they adopted that back in 2015, but by 2018, with 500,000 users, they said they just didn't want to do this because they become, what they say, skeptical about the whole CBDC phenomenon. The former general director at Ecuador's central bank recently warned Eurozone policymakers that a digital euro could potentially disrupt not only privacy, but also democracy. And so that's an interesting comment, because Ecuador is a country where you can go and you can get a residence permit. You can show that you have income, or you can buy real estate. You can put money in the bank. There's a number of ways you can get residence in Ecuador. And while you need to live there to work towards citizenship, you don't necessarily have to live there to keep the residence permit active if you're willing to invest a little bit of money. And so for someone who's concerned about changes to the country they live in, whether it's CBDCs or other things that you believe might restrict your freedom, having a safe place to go where you won't store all of your money, but you can go and live and be further away from some of the chaos in the rest of the world is not a bad idea. Nomad Capitals has helped our clients move to not only 31 tax-friendly countries, but we also help people establish Plan Bs in dozens of countries around the world. You might put your money in one country, you might have a residence permit in another country like Ecuador, and you pick from the buffet of where you are treated the best. Because go where you're treated best is our slogan. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs figure out how to take advantage of countries around the world that each offer them something that's good. Because having a residence permit that you can go to that country if things get dicey is not a bad thing to do, but you want to set it up before things get dicey. Go to nomadcapitalist.com if you want to learn more. Now, let's dig into other countries that don't have CBDCs. We used a map from an organization called the Atlantic Council to plot out which countries aren't going down this path. And I'm going to tell you in a minute the difference between certain countries with CBDCs and other smaller countries that have launched them. So stick around for that. Let's talk about those that have not launched. And so one of the biggest regions for no CBDCs is actually in Central America, which is a common expat destination for folks from North America. So look at a country like Belize, for example, inactive. Look at other countries in Central America, El Salvador, where they actually adopted Bitcoin as the legal currency of the country alongside the US dollar. Costa Rica, Panama. And so Central America is another place where you can go and you can get a residence permit rather easily. Remember, you want to have a backup plan. If you're concerned what's happening in your all-powerful country, if you believe that the surveillance state and all of your liberties being taken away is a problem, I want to be living in a country that is a little bit smaller. I'm not going to move all my money to Costa Rica or to Panama, but I'm going to find a place to park my money somewhere else that is the best place to park money, my investments, whatever it may be. And having a residence permit in one of these countries may not be the worst thing to have. So Central America is a relatively open region. South America itself is relatively covered. Venezuela has an inactive CBDC. Most people aren't going to want to move to Venezuela, although people who have been there recently say it is getting dramatically better as a place to live, and you can buy property for like 10 cents on the dollar, what you would get somewhere else. Also in South America, Bolivia does not have a CBDC, not as immigration friendly, not as friendly for getting citizenship. One of the other parts of the world that comes up, Poland has actually come out and said that while they're closely monitoring what's happening with CBDC issuance elsewhere, they are not going down this path. They actually said that the current circumstances in Poland do not justify the rationale behind launching the pilot tests on CBDC issuance or digital currency implementation by other central banks. And you may say, well, wait a second, Poland is part of the European Union, but Poland actually has its own currency called the zloty. And so they have a little bit of difference between them and what's happening in the EU. Let's talk about some countries that we're very familiar with here. Serbia, Bosnia, and then we get further into Central Asia, Uzbekistan, and really most of the stands in Central Asia. One of the things that I tell you repeatedly is if you want to take back your freedom, you have to be willing to go to a place that is entirely different from where you live now. One of the places that I believe is homey enough that someone can relocate to if need be is Serbia. I have a home in Belgrade. We have a team in Belgrade. I've spent a decade visiting Belgrade. And it's comfortable enough for someone. We've had a lot of our clients, particularly from Australia and New Zealand, move there because of their freedom policies, especially over the last couple of years. Serbia is a country that says, we're not going to do things like the EU. We're going to beat to our own drum. We have our own culture, and we don't want to bend. Now, certain countries in Eastern Europe are more interested in becoming Western. Serbia is right at the door of Europe, but is not part of the European Union, and they've really tried to keep to their own, devices. And as a country that has seen what happens when the government gets a little bit heavy-handed, I think that you're going to see more freedom there, just for the average person on an everyday basis going forward. Bosnia also. Uzbekistan is increasingly becoming an investment destination for people who are in the know. And the other stands, not as much investment destinations, but they are not piloting this as well. I certainly think that people who are saying, or countries that are saying, let's not be so Western, let's do our own thing, that's why these countries are in that camp. Even Poland, for example, much more Eurosceptic than almost all the other countries in the European Union. And so Eastern Europe is certainly a very interesting place. You can get residence permits pretty easily in a country like Serbia. Poland, one thing to do is to check your family tree. Do you have any ancestors, not only from Poland, but anywhere in the European Union? If you could get Italian or Irish or any other EU citizenship, you could go and live in Poland. It's a livable place. Warsaw is a clean city. And so, again, simply moving to another country doesn't necessarily affect your finances, but if you're worried about dwindling freedoms, this could be a good thing to have a residence permit, have a citizenship. Other countries, not so far away, Kuwait, for example, in the Middle East, is the one country that stands out. They're not doing a CBDC. Not as easy of a place to relocate to, but certainly a very affluent place, and they have their own Applebee's, if that makes a difference. Lots of countries in Africa are not rolling out CBDCs. You've got some very small countries like Timor-Leste, also known as East Timor, Papua New Guinea, for example, probably less livable. So Central America and Eastern Europe, two parts of the world that commonly come up for us as places where the governments are doing their own thing. Now, let me tell you what I think is different between a place like some of the countries in the Caribbean, the small sovereign states. Some of them are involved in the citizenship by investment business, which if you're concerned about your freedoms going away, I think citizenship by investment is one thing to consider. You make a donation, you and your family get citizenship in a matter of months. And guess what? Countries like the US are already trying to make it harder for you to do that. The first country has now just rolled out an interview requirement. Not a big deal for an upstanding citizen, but they are trying to put roadblocks in the way of your getting a second citizenship. kind of coincidental in a time when they're trying to have more control over your money. And so I think that the difference between the US or the Eurozone or the UK, where you just see such blatant disregard for the people, and they're trying to roll out something where they have more control of your money, the difference between that and what's going on in a smaller country in the Caribbean, the smaller country doesn't have nearly the outsized influence over you. And I think that there is more of a responsiveness in a small country to what is it the people want. The argument of, hey, we need to get the unbanked banked. I'm sure I'm going to catch some flack for this, but there's more of a case in countries that can't get away with as much, where the people could move, where they just don't have the outsized influence on the world. There's a big difference between that, whether you like it or not, whether it's the ideal situation or not, a big difference between that and what might happen in, let's say, the United States or Canada, where we've already seen, and we've been sharing you those headlines for years, if you protest, we freeze your bank account. If we don't like you, we freeze your bank account. If you don't pay your taxes, which I recommend you pay your taxes, but hey, maybe you made a mistake, we're going to cancel your passport. We've shared with you stories from the US and Canada and the UK and Australia about how if you don't do what they want, they will come down on you. I don't see that kind of talk coming out of Dominica, for example, in the Caribbean. And so I think that much like, we talked about during the pandemic, certain countries were locked down. I was in Istanbul, Turkey one weekend when it was locked down. You wouldn't have really known the difference, by the way. There were people playing, there were people selling food in the streets. The police were just standing at watching and going on and saying, whatever. And that's much different than what would have happened in, let's say, Australia. In the same way, I believe having a CBDC and having a CBDC isn't necessarily the same thing. We can argue that, hey, once the camel's nose is under the tent, that's not a good thing. But I think there's a difference between what Dominica is doing and the US is doing, which is why I would still be happy to have a Caribbean citizenship. By the way, you don't have to live in your Caribbean citizenship country now or ever to get that. But you want to be in a situation in general with the way the world is going where your country has less power over you. This is not talking about doing anything untoward. After all, I am the goody two-shoes of the offshore world. But it's taking back the power where you say, if I want to exercise my right to free speech in favor of a certain cause, I don't want the banks to freeze my account as they did in Canada, as they did to Nigel Farage, as they've done to many other people who have come out and talked about this. And so I think the solution is you want to have some money somewhere where the politicians just don't care. If you're an American, you're going to have to report where that money is, and I suggest that you follow the rules on doing that. But you want to have some money somewhere where you're not protesting in that country. You're agnostic to that country. It's a wealth haven. You get a bank account, you store some gold, you put a ledger with your crypto on it in a vault somewhere, whatever the case may be. You want to have a residence permit or citizenship in a country that supports your values, not just a good passport. And so if you're American and let's say you get citizenship by descent through your ancestors in a European country, you're a dual citizen now, that's nice. Both of those banks of countries are less in favor of freedom. So you might want to add something like citizenship in a country like El Salvador, for example, or get a residence permit in a Costa Rica, or get a residence permit in Serbia. Have a country as part of your residence or citizenship portfolio that is much different than the one that you live in now, that has a much different outlook. I mean, look at what El Salvador did. They adopted Bitcoin as the legal currency of the country. The president's been very outspoken. Why is it Western countries get away with having riots in the streets and all kinds of civil unrest? And if it happened here, people would complain. People would say that we're a banana republic. He makes a very good point there. And so you want the countries, at least one of them, that people are snidely deriding as a banana republic in your portfolio if you want to have the freedom. Because those smaller countries, they need something to grow. El Salvador, Malta, many other countries said, hey, listen, how can we cater to people by being competitive rather than the big countries that are rolling out the big CBDCs where the goal is just squashing, we don't need to be competitive. You're going to do what we ask you to do. We're going to do what we tell you to do. It is no coincidence for me that governments in the big Western countries are making it harder to get citizenship. It's still very much possible, but they want to make it harder. They're making it harder to get bank accounts somewhere else. I don't want to go too far down the conspiracy train, but certainly they want you to have fewer and fewer options for whatever reason that may be. And so if CBDCs are a concern of yours, Nomad Capitalist has helped our clients move to 31 different tax-friendly countries, open bank accounts in more than 4 dozen countries around the world, get citizenship in close to 30 countries around the world. Basically, we help people figure out what are the best options from the buffet to create their own personal, bespoke offshore plan, whether you're ready to make for a plan A where you're moving overseas now, or whether you are putting together a plan B to where you can move overseas if things get bad enough and you'll be more prepared than everybody else. Go to nomadcapitalist.com. This is nothing about accumulating shiny objects like just getting one passport. It's building an entire way of life, which is what you're going to need when your country decides to become more draconian. I don't worry as much about this stuff because I have many, many options all around the world and I'm extremely diversified. I'd like you to feel like that. Go to nomadcapitalist.com and learn how we can help you put together a bespoke plan that protects you from the things that most concern you, whether that's Cbdcs or any of the other initiatives that your government is trying to push through to make you less in power.